And I have my friend Mónica Guzmán here with us today, and I wanted to give a brief introduction to Mónica as we get underway. We are so fortunate to have her with us. I do want to also just acknowledge we're so grateful to have so many guests here from around the country who are a part of this initial Peacemaking Initiative conference that's underway. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get underway here. I want to acknowledge also the presence of our Lieutenant Governor, Deidre Henderson, and her husband, Gabe, who are with us. We also have our Academic Vice President, Justin Collings. I see Dean Laura Padilla-Walker here. I may have neglected some other dignitary out there in the crowd, but everyone is a VIP here, so right. We're grateful that you can be with us. So in my mind's eye, I see Mónica Guzmán like David standing against the Goliath of our outrage industrial complex, which is that, you know what I'm talking about, the web of organizations that amplify and profit from toxic polarization and outrage. Mónica is a senior fellow for public practice at Braver Angels. She's host of a terrific podcast called A Braver Way. She's the founder and CEO of Reclaim Curiosity, an organization that's working to build a more curious world. She's had numerous fellowships at different high-level journalism programs around the country, including the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard University. We could keep going on with those kinds of accolades, but Mónica is also, and most importantly, a wife, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a neighbor, a citizen. And the reason I bring that up is that is replete throughout her terrific book, I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. And we're going to talk about your book quite a bit here today, Mónica. But in Mónica's book, it's really, I think, you know, you talk a lot about your journalism, but you talk a lot about, you know, how you just engage the world in these other roles as a neighbor, as a daughter, some of the challenges there. And I think that's what makes it such a compelling read. So anyway, let's provide a warm BYU welcome to Mónica Guzmán.
Thank you.
Okay, let's have a
fearlessly curious
conversation here, okay?
All right.
And, you know, we only have limited time, so we need to get to some really important questions, okay? So what did you have for breakfast on Tuesday?
I had nothing for breakfast.
You had nothing for breakfast?
Not a thing.
Now, you know why I bring this up. Is in your book, you say that's a good question to ask.
Yeah.
And did you trap me this way?
Well, back then, I used to have oatmeal with, I think, blueberries every morning for breakfast.
Okay.
People change.
They
Who
do.
knew?
Uh-huh.
But it is a good question to ask because there's still a story, and
so
why would I not have
what's the story
breakfast?
behind not eating breakfast on Tuesday? Is it just this Tuesday you didn't have it?
No, it's every darn Tuesday and every day.
Okay.
I discovered I got an egg intolerance during the pandemic, which was terrible because I love the taste of eggs and it's such good protein.
Uh-huh.
And so, you know, then every brunch restaurant visit became a little depressing. And but then I read about intermittent fasting. And I said, you know what? Let's just be that person who doesn't eat before noon and see what it does. And it turned out to do good things, I think, for me and my energy. So here we are, not eating before noon.
Okay. Do you do that as an influencer thing now on the internet?
Oh, gosh. No, nobody quote that, please.
Okay.
No.
So tell me, why is it important to begin with sort of that kind of a mundane question? I mean, we live in dangerously divided times, and yet in some ways, you know, the book is full of and really important tactics. I'm going to say, there's a broad strategic theme to the book, and we'll get to that. But there are a lot of tactics in here, and that's one of them. Say more about why low-stake tactics, if you will.
Too often, it is too easy to see each other as walking opinions. Billboards for what we believe, largely because of the ethic of social media, where people quite literally will put in their profiles, I am this issue as an identity. They might even say unfollow if you disagree. So we sometimes see each other that way, and our imaginations will project that onto people. In such politically anxious times, we even heard research about this. People will sometimes be so nervous about this person they're meeting, and we're going to talk about what now, but what do they think? And we try to make guesses as a matter of survival about their politics. But it hurts our ability to relate to each other if we don't just connect first. So asking what you had for breakfast, just doing the thing that happens naturally when you're in person, which is wanting to, how many times today have we talked about what a beautiful day it is outside? I mean, those innocuous sounding conversations about the weather are still those bits of connection that they may seem small, but what they lead us to do is smile, share a laugh, some moment of levity, and every time, if you then go to something more grave, you will have shared something more positive, and that will give you even a little tiny bit of resilience into whatever comes next.
Okay. And say just a bit more about this concern about trying to read other people's minds, as it were. Yeah. Like, you have this great passage in the book where you talk about beyond our ken. Yeah. What's the origin of that phrase, by the way?
Oh, yeah, it's a Scottish word. And ken used to mean the distance you could see in navigation from your boat. And I think it's about 3 nautical miles or something like that. So the language morphed to be more sort of, kind of rhetorical, where it's about if something is beyond your ken, it's beyond your sight, it's really just beyond your knowledge. So something's beyond my ken. I don't have a lot of exposure to that. I don't really know what that is, what that means. And I think these days we tend to forget that a little bit, that when we live in such siloed communities, we know red zip codes are getting redder, blue zip codes are getting bluer, for example, although there's many spectra of difference when we're starting to silo. Lots of things are beyond our ken. But what we tend to do is fill in the blanks of what we don't know with our projections. And so, as I often say, it's an inconvenient truth of our divided life that whoever is underrepresented in your life, who you tend not to share a lot of familiarity with and a lot of life with, is going to be overrepresented in your imagination. And your imagination's not a great source of truth. So maybe look elsewhere for some of that knowledge.
So for Scottish sailors, back when this was being used, beyond their ken, there were sea monsters, right? And today, beyond our ken might be certain fears, certain people, certain stereotypes.
Exactly. And the research on this shows how many misperceptions and exaggerations there are when people look from one side of the political divide to the other and back, and it happens from both sides. So, yeah, we tend to assume a lot, and we'll assume that, anyone who holds this idea will also hold this other idea, which is worse in our minds, and they'll hold this other idea, and they'll hurt us, and they're hurting the world, and we have to stop them, and we certainly can't get close to them. But the paradox is that without getting close, how can your ken embrace the reality of who they are, what they believe, and why?
Okay. So you live where?
Seattle.
Okay. What's beyond the ken of Seattle?
A lot of things.
Yeah.
lot of things.
Yeah.
Where are you pointing? Because
is Provo, Utah, beyond the ken of Seattle?
Yeah, probably.
Probably is. Yeah. Okay.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah. So
yes.
there's for those that haven't had the blessing yet of reading the book, say a little bit about getting beyond the ken of Seattle. There was this really interesting account about melting mountains.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear. Is there a way to share that?
Yeah. So after the 2016 election.
I remember that election.
Yeah, that one was memorable.
Uh-huh.
Memorable is a word for it. In Seattle, which is true blue, so democratic, so liberal that it can be difficult to think from within that there's any other way to think. November 9th, everyone felt dead. It was a rough day. And I was running a newsletter at the time for the city called The Evergrey. And one of our core values was curiosity, making sure that we're staying open. And so we kind of gave ourselves the challenge. You know, everybody feels a certain kind of way here in Seattle, but there's people in other parts of the country who are elated. So what are we missing? And can we help people here in Seattle discover some of that for themselves? We found an interactive feature online where you could type in the county that you were in the United States, and it would spit out the county nearest to yours that voted exactly opposite in the 2016 election. So you type in King County, Washington, and you get Sherman County, Oregon. Right on the border with Washington, small county, about 2,000 people, heavily agriculture industry, completely different from the urban thing happening in Seattle. So one thing led to another. We did a little bit of research. We picked up the phone. I got really nervous talking to folks in Sherman County going...
Those sea monsters out there.
Exactly. Well, I got nervous more like, what are they going to say to this idea? Because what we wanted to do was say, can we get together? Could we come visit? Could we come get to know you all? Is that going to seem voyeuristic, exploitative, strange, weird? What's it going to be? And we ended up finding an extraordinary partner in a man named Sandy McNabb, an agricultural agent who had been in Sherman County, all his life. There's a street by some windmills on rolling hills named after his family, and goes back generations. And this event happened in March of 2017. And it was extraordinary. We planned hours of experiences that would help us get curious about each other with each other, which in a time where we're mostly talking about people who we don't know and we don't connect with and we don't learn from them who they really are, seemed important. And the lessons for that were pretty extraordinary.
Give us just a little sense of that. There was one about a particular environmental law. Which has been of some controversy here in the state of Utah. Which has very few waterways. There's a lot of dry land here. But tell us a little bit about, do you remember the name of that law?
Yes. So, and to tell the story real quick, the context of this, the liberals from Seattle, who drove down to meet the conservatives from Sherman County, definitely had all our own assumptions about why folks would have voted differently in this particular election. And oftentimes there's an assumption that we make in our politics that's so pernicious and we tend not to catch in the act. And that assumption is, if you oppose what I support, you must hate what I love. So folks from Seattle thought, you voted for this guy. I support LGBTQ rights. I support the climate because I love these things, and you must hate those things. You must hate those people. You must hate those ideas. And while we were there, this fascinating thing happened. Lots of farmers and farming families from Sherman County were there, represented, and as they were talking about their stories leading up to the election, somebody mentioned the Waters of the United States rule as a reason why they voted the way they did. And you see around the room, folks from Sherman County are like, oh yeah, geez, yeah.
Waters of the United States rule.
Waters of the United States rule. And everyone from Seattle was like, what the, what?
What is that?
Turns out, the Waters of the United States rule is a federal, kind of law, regulation that farmers are afraid can be interpreted to mean the following: that let's say you've got, acres and acres of land, it's your farm, and there's a big rain. And so where there was once a valley, there's now a pond. Well, under this rule, maybe the government could say that pond is now under federal regulation. It's now a body of water and we can run it. There's also concerns about what's called furrows. So in between lines of crops, it's furrows, those little kind of divots in between. And so if there's lots of water on your land,
irrigation.
Is that now a body of water? And you might think this, I thought no, clearly this isn't a real problem, but you look it up and there's been lots of close calls and a lot of anxiety. And so a lot of these folks said, Donald Trump, a businessman, he'll understand. He understands farmers. He understands our interests. We can't trust Democrats with that. So that was an example of a variable that folks from Seattle had not considered, right? Because when you say you oppose what I support, you must think what I love, that is a whole host of assumptions you're making. And one of the primary meta-assumptions you're making is that you have all the variables, that everyone made their choice with the same variables that you made yours, which is a profoundly incurious state of mind that I fall into regularly. We all do.
Okay, so we lived through the 2016 election, and this is my vague recollection of after that moment, is that there was this kind of moment where we saw on sort of mainstream media we need to better understand sort of the heartland in some way. We seem to have missed a vibe or a beat that's going on here. And suddenly there's a guy named J.D. Vance who appears on the scene with this book, Hillbilly Elegy, that gives this vivid account of conditions in Appalachia, and he becomes a noted voice for better understanding the plight of heartland America. Well, it's now many years on. I don't see that we actually reconciled after. You went and you brought people from Seattle out to Eastern Oregon. We see people trying to understand, but somehow it hasn't gotten better, Monica.
No, it hasn't.
So is this just a quixotic effort that we're on, trying to build bridges and create peace, or should we just, tell me, what do you
Should all give up, everybody go home. We're done. No,
okay.
I know there's a lot of folks in this room who would probably agree with me because they're doing the same kind of work. This for me is an obsession based on utter conviction about the approaches, the mindsets, the ways of seeing each other and ourselves. That one's really important. That lead to the kinds of behaviors that fulfill, I think, the promise of our pluralistic democratic republic and make processes like persuasion effective for us. We need these. Now, I've recently read a book called Free Speech, A History, From Socrates to Social Media. And boy, history is replete with some ups and huge downs. I don't know that those will ever stop. I don't know how they could, because we keep changing the conditions. We keep changing how we communicate. Technology changes things. Politics globally changes things, and new challenges come at us and break norms, and they need to be reshaped. I like to think that there is a positive through line through it all. If you take enough steps back, I think that's still true. These challenges that we're going through, we can't take them as a sign that bridge building and peacemaking isn't working. I think we take them as the biggest tests,
okay,
and the places where bridge building and peacemaking will be seen with the most skepticism. But I think it's also often the place where people crave it the most. And I don't know about you all, but I feel that right now. So it may be that it seems, well, we're not reversing, so nothing's happening. Well, I don't think that's true, because while some things seem to be going in the wrong direction, the consciousness, awareness, and curiosity and desire for this to be healed, fixed, restored, if that's even a thing to look in the past, I think we just need to build what works for the future, is higher than in my lifetime, if not longer. So I love that about the human spirit. We know what's broken. If there's anything that we agree on across the political divide, it's that.
So say a little bit. Jay, of course, introduced what was happening here today, but you've been experiencing it. Describe what people have been doing this morning in the basement of this building.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So we've been gathering researchers on conflict and peace and how we communicate with each other productively in ways that don't just continue to divide and polarize, gathering those folks with practitioners who have been out there. In some cases, we heard about someone whose organization started in 1982. So did I, by the way. I also started in 1982. I thought, wow. Yeah, with practitioners who've been out in the field, who've been working with people, who've been learning, as I have, sometimes with heartbreaking, kind of visceral reality, the barriers to all of this and the challenges. So I think it's been fabulous and very necessary, because we need to, the practitioners can see where a lot of the needs are and the heat and the edges, and the researchers can gather the evidence that leads to better practices, and can also test some of the things that maybe the practitioners need, but they can also open up avenues that practitioners haven't seen. So we've been doing that all day.
And have you learned anything?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, too many things. I would have to pull out my notes, and that would be rude, because I'd have to go back and grab my notebook. But one thing that stood out is it Jamie here, but a researcher who's been looking at heart rates. When you even mention the possibility of talking to someone on the other side, how just mentioning that.
Wow.
And I told her I got really excited about that kind of research, because I think there's a lot of signals pointing to us understanding ourselves and the physiology of bridging divides, and the activation that freezes us or that gets us to those traumatized responses. I mean, this is also an arena for skill building. So,
and I really want to go there, Monica, because one of the great things about the book is that, and on my very first read of this, quick sort of casual read of it, I was seeing this as a book about how to have better discussions, okay? And what I meant, in my first read, it's like how to have sort of more informative discussions. On a more careful read, what is so important about your work is this emotional dimension that you bring to it, which is that when we're in conversation, we're in conversation with another person. And they're not just a means for information. They are an end in and of themselves, and they have dignity. And that needs to be respected in this in some way. And even though it can be an emotional encounter, we need to somehow develop ways, and the book is chock full of thoughtful ways to lower the stakes, calibrate where we're at. Say a little bit about, I love this section because it's been really helpful for me, where you talk about a conversation console with 5 dials that we have.
Yes.
And this has been, I think this is really useful for thinking about how to be productive. Say a few words about that.
So a lot of times when we jump into spaces where some political disagreement, can really just take off, whether it's social media or in person, we just kind of go with it. We go with it. And what I suggest is, kind of the way you dip your toe into the water a little bit, just check how the conditions are. So in the book, there's this little cute drawing of, imagine you had a little console and like where the dials are set for each of these 5 things.
Yeah.
So embodiment. To what extent are the people in this conversation using the full toolkit of human communication? Right now, we're able to use that.
Uh-huh.
You see us, all of us. You hear our voices. You see the way we express ourselves and the way we smile when we say something that if it were just text might be read ugly, if someone were suspicious of us or something. Embodiment is so important, that full toolkit. Then parity, and I don't mean the funny kind. I mean parity. Are people on an equal playing field on the platform? So even here in person, if someone is asking a question, it's not the same as being on stage. Yeah. There's a different sort of level. If someone is posting on Facebook and someone's commenting on Facebook, well, the poster is able to hide or block or delete the comment. It's not parity. Then you have attention. And so that one's really tough in our asynchronous digital environment, where even on a Zoom call, where you might think, I've got this person's attention, we are synchronously here, albeit through digital channels, but if you've ever seen somebody's face suddenly get really bright on the computer screen, it's like, they just opened another browser tab. What are they doing? And it's one of those bright ones, maybe it's Google. What's happening? Are they paying attention to me? Then there's containment, and I love containment. Containment seems so important. To what extent is the conversation contained to the people actually engaging in it? Mm-hmm. On social media, we have this panopticon, this invisible audience of witnesses whose listening we can't see. So we are left, once again, to fill in the gaps with our imagination. What are they thinking? What will they think of me if I say this, right? So we just narrow and protect what we say because we don't know what, hundreds, thousands, dozens of people are gonna think. But when it's one-to-one, a person, and no one else is listening, that's when the most candor can come out. And candor is that combination of honesty and openness, where curiosity can really thrive. And then finally, time. On your way out the door is not a great time to be like, can we talk about abortion? No. No, we can't. Please don't try. Yeah. Somebody's rushed, someone's got something on their mind. We don't have time. Can we continue? And as I like to say too, that the best conversation is the one that you can keep having later. We tend to be so demanding of ourselves. We got an hour coffee with Uncle Bob, and we didn't get the answers from Uncle Bob that satisfied us. Yeah. It's like, well, you can't put Uncle Bob on your terms.
So and I think if you look at this when you get your hands on the book, think about these kinds of conditions. How often could a very good conversation be improved with a little extra time?
Exactly.
With some containment around it. Mm-hmm. You were last night. There was an event with some state legislators, and I'll just note. I think what was attempted to be done there, and it was a nice event, put on by Braver Angels, but Braver Angels had these great conversations with some state legislators over DEI issues in the state and had met for 8-10 hours. They had time. They were in a contained situation where there was no press there. It was just a chat with them, getting to know each other, that kind of thing. And I think that they wanted to somehow bring a little replication with some of the people that had been in that room onto the stage, but it was on a stage.
It's a little harder,
right? And it was a brief conversation, and I think we got not quite the quality conversation. I mean, it was a good conversation.
Yeah.
There's some really lovely moments that came through and some insight, but I think if you played around with the conversation console, you might have wanted to change some of those conditions.
Well, and that's the ultimate message of it, is that you can turn up the dials, and a lot of people forget that they can. So there was one time that my mother, and maybe we'll talk about me and my parents in a moment, but one time that my mother posted something on Facebook, we're a politically divided family, and all I wanted to do was just comment. And I told myself, nope, pick up the phone. And she picked up. And we ended up in a 2.5-hour conversation that was really cool.
Yeah.
It had its heat, but boy, it was really cool. So if I had just, who knows, right? She would have been left to read that, feel attacked in front of her Facebook friends, et cetera, but you can always turn it up. Just because a conversation starts in a certain place doesn't mean it has to stay in that place. Turn up the containment by, hey, can we follow up in the DMs? Can we pick up the phone? Turn up the embodiment with picking up the phone or meeting up for coffee. Turn up the time by saying, I don't think now's a good time for this. Could we talk about this later? I actually do want to talk about it, just now's not a good time.
So social media seems to violate almost all these rules.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know what? I neglected to do something here at the beginning, was to remind you that near your seats there are some QR codes where you can ask some questions. I also forgot to grab the iPad, whereupon these questions will appear. So anyway, so thank you, James. Because we want to get your questions into this. So if you have questions for Mónica, feel free to put those in, and they'll populate here.
Can I say a quick note on social media real quick, just because you brought it up?
Yeah.
My friend and fellow bridge builder, Angel Eduardo, likes to say that social media is the boss level of discourse. And what he means by that, it's the gaming analogy of, you get to the boss, the end of the level. It's not impossible to have excellent conversations on social media at all. It takes a certain kind of skill where you have to fold in the sorts of things that come across in in-person conversation organically without your having to think about it. You have to fold that into words, So because they can't see your smile and your tone, you have to go more out of your way to say what you mean and what you don't mean. That really helps. So it can happen. We just can't think of it the same way as we do in-person conversation, where we're missing so many of these other cues.
Hey, tell us about you brought up mom.
Yeah.
Tell us about those relationships. You talked about how there was some heat. I'm guessing you could bring some heat. Does mom bring some heat?
Oh, yeah.
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 And there's this discussion in the book about sobremesa.
Oh, yeah.
I probably pronounced that completely wrong.
That's fine. It's sobremesa. That is my favorite word in Spanish that has no equivalent in English. And sobremesa is the conversation that follows a meal, when you're still at the table, and maybe no one's cleared their plates, and maybe whoever was supposed to clean up isn't, or whatever, and it's just you're just still there talking, because it's awesome. I'm Mexican, I'm a Mexican immigrant, and my abuelita Carolina, down in Mexico, has this gorgeous, big, round dining room table. And as a kid, it was such a mystery to me. Because after I finished eating, and all my tias and tios and abuelitos are around the table, I just want to go back outside. Like, I want to go play again. Because what am I going to sit here? That's boring. It was my real kind of introduction to the mystery that many children, I think, grapple with. How could it possibly be fun for adults to just talk? But sure enough, it would go on for hours. And my grandfather would have his siesta and come back and no one would even notice. And pretty soon it was dinner time and they were still talking. So, and I would hear from, a couple rooms away, I would hear the laughter and the joy, and then I would hear hushed tones and maybe a sharp voice. And then laughter again. And so, wow, like what's going on in there? Yeah. Conversation is so dynamic. I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for having the extraordinary capability of doing something as sophisticated and as seemingly simple as having a conversation. Like, think about all the micro decisions you have to make about how the other person's receiving what you're saying, how you're going to phrase this mystery that is your meaning, this precious thing that is your meaning. All we want is to be understood. But language is a technology, and it's an imperfect one. It's the best technology we've got to try to take our meaning out and give it to someone else in the hope that they'll see us. it's kind of beautiful and it's very messy.
Well, and we've said a few words here about President Russell M. Nelson's call for peacemaking, who is chair of the Board of Trustees and president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In the peacemaking talk that's been referred to a number of times, he says, we can literally change the world one person and one interaction at a time. How? By modeling how to manage honest differences of opinion with mutual respect and dignified dialogue. So the beauty that you see, we're getting that from our church. Today, we have a new pope, Pope Leo XIV, whose first message to the world is peace be with you, and a call to action for his flock to be bridge builders. So we're seeing this of course these things are meaningful and sacred. And so I love the account there about Sobra Mesa and how that affects our families. And this has just gone to sleep. There we go. I am going to ask you some questions from our audience, if I could do that.
Great.
So Paul Oshinsky, who's here from, where's Paul? He's out here.
Hi, Paul.
From More in Common.
Yay.
Yeah. Great organization doing really interesting ways to help us understand how we truly have more in common than we have differences, and over big issues, right? Really interesting. Paul is asking, what if someone is not curious and meets your curiosity with contempt? What's the way forward there?
Contempt is really hard. Talked earlier about the heart rate going up. The anticipated attack or the actual attack and what it can do to us and how it can freeze us. And I think about, people often ask me, how do you know when you need to stop? How do you know when a conversation across a divide is just not worth it? And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all, but the best thing that I can say is that the heat, the friction, and the heat it generates between perspectives, the heat in a conversation is good. The question is, are you cooking something or are you burning something? Are you cooking up understanding, keeping it at a simmer, or if it burns, you're bringing it back down, that's okay. Or are you burning trust, dignity, a relationship? So the question about contempt is about that. But here's the good news. There is a lot of research that I'm very excited about showing that it only takes one, that curiosity is contagious. Now, there's no guarantees. But for example, Julia Minson over at Harvard Business School and Kennedy School has done great research on receptivity, receptive language, hedging language. When one person in a conversation uses more flexible language, instead of being absolute in an expression of a point of view, now as I think about it, I think I fall down on, this is where I come down. But what do you think? Just places where you open the door tend to be mimicked by the other person. Now, again, if it's just too hot, if there's too much contempt, look, the best thing to do is to pull away, is to exit, and exit before too much burning has happened. There are dignified ways to exit. One of the hardest things in that moment is not just how do you continue to be curious or move forward, but how do you not answer contempt with contempt? That's a big problem, and honestly, it's pull away, because your body is going to be so guarded and so on the defensive that you may say or do something you'll regret, and it might safeguard the whole relationship for you to be able to see what's going on from the outside and say, you know what? I'm glad you're being honest with me in your tone and your words, but I think I can't do this right now.
And that's a great phrase to keep in mind, right? I have a few exit options.
Yeah.
Because withdrawing is going to be probably an important skill from time to time.
Absolutely.
Right?
No, and I can't tell you how how much more understanding has been able to be cooked up between me and my parents, even when we were growing up, because we were like, you know what, let's watch that episode of X-Files that we recorded now. This seems like a good time, you know? And we were able to do that in the middle of conversations, just say, let's go do this other thing. But we would do it in a way that we weren't pushing each other away. We were pausing the conversation.
So it's interesting. We're getting some interesting questions about sort of familial things here. I'll do another one that way, and then I want to get into some institutional questions. But this is from Rob Reynolds, who is on the BYU faculty here. My teenage children are horrified by the idea of conversations with strangers. It seems to be a popular sentiment for their generation. How can I foster more curiosity in them? What resources, in addition to this book, can I pull from?
Yeah, well, the first step there is, and maybe you already know, but ask them lots of questions about what they're afraid of, where the concerns are. Ask them to be in that situation and talk to you from that situation, rather than just trying to rationalize, right? Actually be in that situation. Put your mind and your body there and tell me what's going on when you think about that. And having that conversation can, help illuminate what the concern actually is, because there's lots of reasons people might be afraid to have conversations with strangers. So, the way to encourage has to be informed by that. I think it's sometimes, and again, I'm generalizing here, but sometimes it's just a lack of practice. So can you think of a low risk, really, really easy, level 1, engagement or interaction with a stranger? With my kids, we don't have a kids table. The kids have sat at the adults table. We're very social. We have people over all the time, and we just have them see and practice, and we involve them in conversations whenever we can. And sometimes that's received different ways. They're now 10 and 12, but I'm doing that for a while. So there might just be ways to just make that organic, make that part of the flow of the day, and so that they barely even notice that they've just been exposed to it. And if you build up those circumstances, you can say, well, Johnny, you did talk to Marvin the other day.
Yeah.
That seemed to go pretty well. And, Johnny goes, oh, yeah, I guess it did, didn't it? Just noticing.
Thoughtful there. Let's, from Christopher Rains, who's a student here in linguistics. I recently listened to your book. I love the emphasis on personal relationships and interactions. I'm curious if there are any institutional or policy changes that you think could help reduce polarization. Things like ranked choice voting or congressional reforms.
Yeah.
Ready to go there?
Yeah, I would stop short of flat out, endorsing anything, mostly because I don't feel informed enough. But I will say, just from my impressions and what I have learned, I think ranked choice voting would be wonderful. One of our researchers, Neil, today was pointing out that the partisan nature of primaries, even Yuval Levin, who I understand came to visit BYU not long ago, in his book American Covenant, which looks at the roots of our constitutional system, really points to the partisan primary as one of the innovations on that system that maybe hasn't been so great in lots of ways. So anything that brings us back to not just incentivizing our politicians to build bigger coalitions in order to win elections, but also anything that gets more input from the citizen. Ranked choice voting, you're getting a lot more input from the citizen. And that just sounds like a pretty cool idea to me.
Let me, Matt Armstrong, who is on the BYU faculty here, says, have you seen any effective efforts in embedding peacemaking efforts into K-12 or higher ed curriculum?
Oh, that's interesting. Yes. In Seattle, actually, Roosevelt High School, for years, has had this one class on political conflict, and It's a public school, so this hasn't been easy, but they've made it sort of an institution where the students in this class go to either South Africa or Northern Ireland every year. And they go and they meet people who have been through the thing. So that's a community, a public school community that's been able to do that for their kids. And I went and talked to that class. I was like, whoa, this is awesome. This is extraordinary. Also, Braver Angels works closely with an organization called Bridge USA. And Bridge USA is awesome. And they've got chapters in colleges all over the country. And they've also set up chapters in high schools. So Nathan Hale High School was one where I got to witness a high school debate about Israel-Gaza with no adult moderators to be seen. Oh my gosh, this sophomore, Kayla, moderated. And it was amazing. And there was a Palestinian student, Jewish student who participated, but it was open. And I was just sitting there going, wow, why are we so worried? What if we could trust each other a little more, even young people, to kind of figure it out for themselves? And I've seen so much interest. And I'm not saying necessarily let's let everyone figure it out for themselves. Like, stretchers are great. But I do ask myself sometimes if we have lost trust in each other's ability to find our way.
So, and say just a bit more, because this was another question that came up about that kind of style of debate. So call it Braver Angels style debate.
Yeah.
We had an opportunity to do that a bit here on campus earlier this year, thanks to the with Braver Angels and the National, it's the Trustees and Alumni.
ACTA.
ACTA, yeah. Great organization that's part of that coalition. Could you just describe, you said it was student run and moderated and so on. Give people just a little more sense of what those look like.
Yeah, the Braver Angels debate. So, fun fact, I get to chair my first Braver Angels debate, in a week or two? Oh my God. And you might think, she seems so comfortable on stage. Like, I don't know, kind of scared of this. But so Braver Angels debates are not about crowning a winner, one side or another. We take super divisive issues of the moment, whatever it happens to be, immigration, the first 100 days of the Trump presidency, whatever it is. And there's a resolution, and there's folks who speak for or against the resolution, and there's a particular order, and it's open, so anybody can speak. We have a couple of rules. There's things in the structure that are kind of meticulously designed to help people learn together and hear and be heard, which is the ultimate goal, really, is can we engage in a collective search for truth rather than just try to win or lose or what have you, make the other side lose. So one of those rules that works like a charm, it's incredible, is after each person speaks, and there's a strict time limit, when their time is done, then the chair looks for questions from the audience who has a question for the speaker. And inevitably, even though we explain the rules at the beginning, someone will say, well, why would you think that blah, blah? And immediately the chair comes in and says, why would the speaker think? Oh, I'm sorry, why would the speaker think? So in other words, you're not allowed to use you. You're not allowed to use you as you ask your question. Instead, you have to address your question to the chair. So, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask the speaker why he thinks blah, blah, blah. So if you play it out in your head, there's so many heated, ragey ways you could phrase a question that as soon as you put that constraint on it, has the speaker considered blah, 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 blah. Incredible way to get the substance without the heat. It's amazing. So that's just one of the things. But it was watching a Braver Angels debate back during COVID about lockdowns in April 2020 that sold me on this organization. And I said, I have got to get involved because I did not think this was possible. And experiencing it was pretty transformative, as I think it has been for lots of folks.
This is from Susie Cameron, a student here. When people say things I don't agree with, I tend to keep quiet and avoid conflict. But I don't think that's very healthy behavior. How can I disagree with others in a way that doesn't offend them, but rather opens them up to conversation?
Oh, what a beautiful question. I mean, first of all, I relate.
relate?
Of course I do. Oh my gosh, there's a time and a place, right? And we always have to think about that.
She says she's timid about these things.
Yeah.
Anyway, you're timid?
Okay, no, I'm not timid. Fair.
Okay.
But we all gauge the context of things, and
but
you're
conflict averse. Is that right? I don't know. You seem to relate.
Depends, but I still relate. I think it's a fairly universal experience.
Yeah.
No matter how conflict avoidant or eager people are, there's always going to be that place where you feel like your voice is not going to be honored, and this is not But what I think is one of the deepest costs to that is that then people just tend, and I think this is worse now than it might be if it were less polarized time. People tend to assume you agree unless you say you disagree, and therefore they now have a misperception about you. And we talked about misperceptions. This is actually one of the dynamics that makes the following, I think, quite true, is that even though we tend to focus in our discussions about depolarization on left versus right, there's also a blindness that polarization creates right within the right and within the left. I've been in conversations in Seattle with folks who are very progressive and start to talk about abortion in a certain way, and then they just look around and just kind of assume that everyone at the table agrees. Mm-hmm. And while I tend to lean progressive, I have very complicated views about abortion. And so to answer the question, some of the things I've done in that situation, because I do not like the idea that people are going to not see me because I don't say something, is sometimes I use humor, sometimes I just make a little quite quick quip, but I usually use language like, for the record, by the way, I have pretty complicated views on abortion. No need to talk about that now, though. Just gonna slip in some truth there, just making sure, that registers for people. And so I have for the most part found ways to do that, in that situation. There's a different situation where it's like a pylon, right? This happens a lot in classrooms, where one view is dominating, and then the student who has, I guess, what turns out to be the minority view, but maybe has experience, that would be really illuminating for this discussion, just feels like they can't. And so the advice there is, talk about your story, not your opinion. Make it about your story, I heard about this happening in a classroom in Arizona, about guns after a shooting that had happened not far away, not long before that, and the class was just all kind of anti-gun and whatnot, and a student just raised his hand and said, "My dad owns a gun shop," and just let that bomb drop, and the professor, who's a friend of mine, just saw that opportunity and went for it. Like, tell us more. What's it been like for your dad since the shooting? And suddenly you get information, experiential information, mm-hmm. that is not tied to an opinion or to a judgment of the opinion on the other side. And what happened next was a very lively conversation in that classroom. Suddenly a lot more complicated than it had started out.
Is there, with this kind of reticence, mm-hmm. do you think there's a gendered aspect to this?
Ooh, why don't you tell me your impression so that I can comment on that?
Should we talk to my wife about this?
Oh, maybe. Well, I've seen theories come from many directions. Yeah. I'm wondering which one you're...
Well, I'm just... I've had experience in the classroom where oftentimes it seems a little harder to bring out the female students than the male students, mm-hmm. in a discussion.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that is probably true in some places. I think in other places the worry about who's being silenced might be just on a different spectrum altogether.
Yeah.
But boy, I do speak at a lot of schools, and it is alarming how. But at least colleges are noticing. Who is it that tends? Where does the pattern tend to exist? And folks are trying to solve for that. I think there are ways to do it. One of my favorite interventions comes from Wheaton College in Massachusetts, a sociology professor who was telling me that her class used to be so lively, and they would debate any old thing. It's sociology. I majored in sociology. I love sociology. It's like, just asking questions about society and how it works, and let's debate, and let's talk about it, and it's great. And, just all of a sudden, students' willingness to talk about hard things just went off a cliff. She was like, what do I do? And so the next semester, she tried something, and she handed out these, small composition notebooks, and she said, 10 minutes at the end of every class, we're going to reserve time for you all to tell me, because it's a discussion-based course, tell me how the discussion went. What do you feel like you weren't able to say that you wish you could have said? What was missing? What's going on? So in this case, what had happened, the story she told me was, they had watched a film about Appalachia, and the discussion was about racism. And it was a full discussion, and it took up all the time. And in the intervening time before the next class, she was reading the notebooks, and she saw a note from a student from Appalachia, and wrote this thing about, I'm from Appalachia, and we didn't even talk about one of the things the documentary was about, which is poverty and class. Like, we didn't even get to that, and I just didn't know how to say it, because it can be so charged to bring anything up when there's race, and I just didn't know. So the next class, the professor came in and said, I want to thank all of you, even though it was just one, all of you who pointed out that in our discussion on the documentary, there was an angle that's really important that we didn't discuss. I've switched the syllabus. We're going to hold our discussion on so-and-so for next week. And this week, I think, let's talk about the socioeconomic class pieces and robust discussion. And the professor knew which student it was and just kind of helped build some room, right, for that student to say her piece. And so that's kind of marvelous. Yeah. So there are ways to do that. And so what she did was she used containment, right? We talked about containment. In a classroom, it's a plenary. It's everyone talking at once to each other on stage at all times. Well, you can innovate. And this was a one-on-one trusted relationship, each student and that professor is taking care of the quality of that conversation in her class.
And creating parity as well.
Creating
That's beautiful.
Parity,
yeah. It's gone by very fast, but we've come to the end of our hour. I highly commend, I never thought of it that way. If you need better skill in how to love your neighbor and love your enemy, this is a book chock full of skill-building ways to do that. And so we're so honored to have you with us. Please join me in thanking Mónica Guzmán.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.